Press Club. We've been around since 1885, continuously serving North America and Milwaukee, and we have never done a virtual event like this, solely virtual, digital, and it's quite the occasion for all of us, and we're glad that you came along to join us. Allow me to introduce myself. I'm Gene Miller, president of your Milwaukee Press Club, also host of Wisconsin's Morning News on WTMJ. Joined today by our panelists, Tony Atkins of today's TMJ4, Eric Bilstad of News Radio 620 WTMJ, and from your Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, Elliot Hughes. We have some sponsors that we would like to thank as well for making all of this happen. Our presenting sponsors, Spectrum News One, our sustaining sponsor, Miller Quas, and our event partners, WizPolitics.com and Rotary Club of Milwaukee. We can't thank them enough for all that they have done in terms of getting us up to speed in terms of digital technology and being able to do this presentation today. WizPolitics partners with the Press Club for these sorts of luncheons, our Newsmaker luncheons, and an ongoing series of events that they're doing with us here in Milwaukee, sponsored by UW-Milwaukee, the Wisconsin Academy of Global Education and Training, 1125 at Pabst, the Milwaukee Police Association, the Firm Consulting, the Medical College of Wisconsin, and Spectrum. We're all here today to join with a very, very special guest, our first ever in terms of doing our only digital platform. That would be a man who needs no introduction because he literally is going to introduce himself, Milwaukee Police Chief Alfonso Morales.
Thank you very much, Gene. Thank you for that introduction. Thank you all for having me here. Just to start off, I'm Chief Alfonso Morales of the Milwaukee Police Department. Born and raised in the city of Milwaukee, a product of the city of Milwaukee. I have a wife, also born and raised in the city of Milwaukee. We've been married for over 20 years. I have a son and daughter, 18 and 15, and one's getting ready to graduate from high school. So he's experiencing life-changing events with this pandemic that obviously experiencing something that many of us never at that age. Born and raised in the city of Milwaukee, what does that mean? My parents, I come from a family of 10. The first 5 were born in Mexico. My parents immigrated here and lived in the north side of Milwaukee off of 33rd and Garfield. Saw the transition in the city of Milwaukee growing up. I'm a product of Milwaukee Public Schools, very proud product of Milwaukee Public Schools. Very proud in so much as what I say about Milwaukee Public Schools, like the school that I went to, Milwaukee Tech, the leadership, the training and mentoring that went into that is part of why I am where I am today. Initially, I went to Milwaukee Tech to be an auto mechanic, and I left Tech going to college. Went to college to something that I never expected to do, something that I didn't know what I was going to do once I went to college. But that was another step in life that involves training and mentoring, where I was led in a direction of criminal justice and led into the field of law enforcement. That was my first taste of saying, this is what you should probably do for a career. While at Carroll College, I interned with the United States Marshal Service and applied for several different law enforcement agencies when I graduated from there. First one to pick me up was the City of Milwaukee Police Department, where I started my 27-year career with them. Again, the training and mentoring, and it's a cycle that you'll hear me often say, it continued. Have a 27-year career here. In that career, I learned a lot. One of the skills that I was able to bring to the department at that time was the ability to speak 2 languages, that being Spanish. What that did to me is it led me in a path of, with the police department and a career that exposed me to much more than the normal police officer, your young police officer would have. It exposed me to a lot. Most of my career was spent in gangs, drugs, guns, into robberies, into homicide, the dark side of policing. And when I say the dark side, is the area that you see the bad area of the community. The changing piece in that, moving into supervision, was being removed from that part of policing and going back to the district and seeing the community, understanding that the part that I was dealing with the majority of my career, and you'll hear me say this in my strategy later, is and was the 10% of the people that cause the majority of the problems in the city. The majority of the city are great people, the people that we engage with on a daily basis through our patrols with the police department. The area that I really wanted to expose more is that relationship piece with the community, which goes into the philosophy that I have, which is very community centric in building and establishing relationships, and put me in the area that I am today.
Very well, Chief. Thank you very much. And let us begin. And this will be our batting order as we proceed. By the by, to our audience that is viewing from home, work, office, wherever the case may be, please feel free to enter your questions for the Chief. Anything that you would like to have answered that maybe our panelists don't get to during the course of the proceedings, we'll try to squeeze those in at the very end. So we will start with Tony Atkins of today's TMJ4. He'll hand off to Eric Bilstead. Elliot Hughes will follow Eric, and then we'll just keep going in that rotation. Gentlemen, let's begin. Go ahead, Tony.
I'm here. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, sir.
Right. Yeah, I'll just begin. First of all, good afternoon, Chief. And we'll just start. My first question for you is just with COVID-19. What have been some of the biggest challenges within the Milwaukee Police Department when it comes to enforcing just like your normal, like day-to-day efforts?
The challenge is we are this is not in the pecking order. This is a health department or a health issue. So in the hierarchy, the police, the law enforcement piece is different. It's different because we're all looking as a community, as a city, state, as a nation, minimal exposure. But we are still out there and have to do a job. We have 1,000 contacts a day through calls for service, up to and over 1,000 contacts. To try to reduce that contact changes our strategy. It pushes us more in a reactive mode. And it's also understanding that the enforcement piece of this, you're not dealing most often with criminals. You're dealing with the public that, it's tough to stay at home for each and every one of us, including myself. You heard I have a son and daughter that want to get out. They want to see their friends. And they're really seeing how much social media really impacts them. They want to physically see their friends and family.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's get it over to Eric Bilstead with 620 WTMJ.
Hi, Chief. When it comes to the pandemic, what crimes per se are you seeing more of, and which ones have declined?
I can talk about the crime that's impacting most because it was one, unfortunately, that we're starting the year to try to address, and that's domestic violence. It's been a big driver of violent crime, and it's been increasing heavily this year. Let's not forget the triple homicide, the mother and the 2 children in February, and that was pre-pandemic. And we're still seeing incidents of domestic violence or intimate partner. And I often say intimate partner because some of these incidents are not statutorily domestic violence, but it is familial related, intimate partner. We are seeing a large drive in that. Our homicides are up, our non-fatal shootings are up, and several of that is through domestic violence. We wanted to address it. We brought a group of leaders together in the beginning of February, from the system, the criminal justice system, to community, to health, to really take a deep dive into domestic violence. Unfortunately, with the pandemic, it's restricted our ability to convene and address that. We're still trying to do what we can in messaging. I know Sojourner Truth House is trying to message it to show that there may be shelters to get the message out. But that is one of the drivers. As far as a reduction in crime, we do have some things that are down. Our calls for service are slightly down, which is good, but our contacts are still there. I could only imagine if our calls for service were where there should be, or I shouldn't say where it should be, because we don't want the large calls for service, but if they were where they're at, that would really make it a challenge for us on the exposure part.
Over to Elliot.
Good afternoon, Chief. I was wondering, now that we're a month into the Safer at Home order, from your perspective, do you think cooperation with the order is trending up or down in Milwaukee?
I would say it's consistent. We're still working on messaging. We cannot message and educate enough. And the biggest reason for that, as I stated, and I said this to our officers, in dealing with this problem, we're not dealing with that 10% that I talk about often. And some people may think, well, we're not dealing with criminals. We're not dealing with peaceful people carrying firearms. We're dealing with people that are congregating because they want to socialize. And we're really trying to beat in the message. We're really trying to push that message of education, messaging, and having now next week with the citations, being able to distinguish which ones we're going to be able to use with the actual state crime and throwing those charges in versus the citation piece.
Thank you. Tony, back to you.
I just have a question. There was another department, the Racine Sheriff's Office, decided to not enforce the stay-at-home order. Where do you stand on that decision, and do you think that that is something that may not help the cause and everything we're going through right now?
For me, as a law enforcement leader, again, we are not the lead. The health officials throughout the city, county, state, and our nation are the lead. This is their expertise. Our job is the safety of the community. Our job is public safety. Our job is protecting our community. So for opinions at that level, my job is policing, and I will refrain from opining in that field.
All right, kick it back over to Eric.
So what does that mean, though? If a couple of taverns and restaurants decide next weekend they want to just open things up, do you have to send someone over there to ask them to close down?
And exactly, we're going to try to use our relationships. We're going to try to use our messaging, the education, what the problems that can be caused. We have had those incidents that you were talking about where businesses wanted to stay open, and you know, I feel bad for them. I mean, some businesses are just opened up, or some businesses are probably going to close because of this. So there's strongly that empathy. But again, we have a job to do, and it's a job that we swore to do. And again, we will go down the pecking order to determine if this is a citation or if an arrest needs to be made. But we're going to try to use relationships. We're going to try to use other ways of getting people to comply before we get to that.
Elliot?
You mentioned that the citation that City Hall approved gives you some flexibility in the way that you enforce the order. But under what circumstances would your office still pursue criminal charges against someone who is violating the order?
Well, currently, and it's kind of like, well, like how we do it internally, progressive discipline. In incidents where people are involved in crime, we're going to throw in another criminal charge. And I've said that publicly. In incidents where we're not dealing with that person, they're going to be the one that determines whether it's a criminal charge or a citation. If it escalates to the level where they're not complying, we have a job to do.
Tony, back to you.
Okay, last Saturday, I covered a large protest along, Blue Mound in Brookfield. A lot of people were outside with, they say, the right to stand their ground on the sidewalks and protest. How would you handle the situation if such a large protest came here into the Milwaukee area in your jurisdiction?
It's going to be a tough decision. We're going to start off with, again, messaging. Again, we're going to go through the steps. But if we continue and there's no compliance, citations will be issued, and if it merits, arrests will be made.
All right, we're going to kick it back over to Eric.
How has the pandemic affected training or recruit training or some type of development as far as growth and moving your officers forward?
The pandemic has affected us in a number of ways. The training piece really shuts down the police academy. And the police academy, it shuts it down to specific to the training pieces that are mandated that we have to do. Where the pandemic is really affecting us is, and we've taken some steps in the training piece, but it's affected us in promotions. The department, we have several people that retire on a regular basis. I'm just going to give you a little historical to show how it's really impacting us. In 1990 was the start of mass hiring within the Milwaukee Police Department through, at that time, the COPS grant through Washington. And there were classes of 2 classes to 4 classes a year, which meant 120 to 240 officers being hired from 1990 to approximately 1997. What that means is if you move up with 25 years and out, it gives us the ability to retire. So as of 2015, we're having up to 300 plus people eligible to retire in any given year. Currently, we have over 200 members that can retire. And most often, if you do 25 years on the job, you're in a promoted position. So vacancies are large. I came on in February of 2018 as chief of police, pushing promotional positions within the Milwaukee Police Department. I have not had one promotional process yet for these positions. We're down more than 50 detectives. We're down double-digit sergeants. We're down double-digit lieutenants. And currently we have captains that are going to be retiring before the start of the summer. And we're talking about a large, a big number of captains that are affected. And you're, in a sense, stealing from Peter to pay Paul if you're putting somebody in a promoted position, but you don't have, like if I'm promoting my captains, where are my lieutenants going to come from? Well, if I'm using sergeants to staff lieutenants' positions, where are my sergeants going to come from? I can backfill detectives' positions, which I've been doing currently, but at the sergeant rank, I can't put a police officer to backfill a sergeant. So these are extremely, the pandemic is holding the promotional processes. I would have loved to have seen them before the pandemic, but now that's halting the interview processes that we're waiting to get those promotional lists out there.
Elliot?
How confident do you feel that you can keep your department, adequately staffed or at least efficiently staffed throughout the pandemic, and that you can minimize chances of an outbreak within your own ranks?
Well, that is a challenge. It's communicating with other major cities and seeing what's being done. What ends up happening is you get leaner in certain areas, and unfortunately, the pandemic right now has shut down a lot of things, like, for example, the schools. So our Office of Community Outreach and Education, those officers have been disseminated back to the districts. We've messaged less activity at the district stations in the front office. We've slimmed down in our court administration sections. We slimmed down in some of the non-essential services within the police department, public records, to get those officers prepared and ready to fill in the essential positions. Our first week was pretty rough in our communication center, where we had one telecommunicator have it, and an entire shift ended up being quarantined. The good thing is that the majority of them, actually all of them, are back, and we were able to staff that quickly and take care of the 2 weeks of the quarantine and get everybody back to work. I am happy as well to see that the number of sworn and civilian staff that have been quarantined as a big result of the COVID is a small number, and I'm very happy to see our civilian and our sworn come to work. And I say that because this isn't an easy one, where if somebody doesn't want to come to work, they can find a way to say, I'm staying home. Even think of our children that have no childcare because everything is shut down. And our sworn, our civilian staff are coming to work. I can't be any more prouder than that, of that.
Tony, back to you.
Chief, have you had any contact with police leaders, law enforcement leaders in some more affected areas, say New York or Washington State?
Yes, we actually, we were in a phone conference with major cities with Detroit, who was impacted. It was if you want to call it a horror story, an emergency, Detroit had it. The chief was able, Detroit was able to get online and tell us the experience. It was very scary to see what happened over there. And I can, I'm happy and very thankful to the Lord that it didn't happen here in Milwaukee. But they're all recovering. There were resources that were taken or sent over to Detroit to get them back on track. And it was great to see people coming together, organizations coming together that help Detroit overcome that.
Eric?
Chief, you good? You need a drink of water or anything?
Pardon?
You need a drink of water or anything? Are you good? All right, okay. All right. All right, so the DNC has been pushed back into August for now. How are you able to plan for an event that you don't know what it looks like?
The planning for that continues to change, which is, and one of the messages, you made me drink water and I'm going to cough. Hold on a second. Sorry about that. But
No
the training in the training for that, it accommodates the constant changes, which one of the struggles is different entities in the process for the DNC and the preparation for the DNC wanted to make certain things public knowledge. But one of the reasons why the law enforcement piece doesn't really want to talk about what's public is not that we're holding anything back as much as it's subject to change. And we've really seen it with this pandemic. The pandemic has been the priority. We're still planning, we're still preparing, but those things will change. Currently, the DNC went from July to August. So we're got to work with those challenges, but what happens if it goes from August to September? So we have to be able to adapt to that. And in the conversations that we have amongst the law enforcement leadership, those discussions come into play.
So would you prefer a virtual convention if you had your choice?
The security piece for the DNC will be there.
All right, Elliot.
I was curious so before the pandemic, obviously it wasn't very socially acceptable to wear masks, and now people are encouraged to do so. So has the proliferation of masks at all made your job more difficult? Is it more difficult to identify someone just like a witness who's maybe wearing a mask, or have the proliferation of masks encouraged someone to, has it encouraged anyone to commit a crime or anything like that? Has it emboldened anyone that way?
Okay. As far as the crime, I have not seen an uptick in the wearing of masks as a description. We have, outside of the pandemic, that's often a trend in the winter. Mm-hmm. Going into November and December, you will see an increase as the weather gets colder of crimes occurring. The ski mask is part of the description. In this case, no, that's not been the case. I will tell you, as far as masks, we want to thank the public for coming forward. Masks have been an important piece for the PPEs, personal protective equipment for law enforcement. The medical staff needs them. The first responder fire department needs them, and the health organizations need, outside of that, need them. So on the pecking order, we have been struggling to purchase them. We have an order coming, but through donations, the public, the community really came forward to providing masks to us. And we are getting close to the point where we can put it as an order that all officers having consistent contact wearing masks. We're getting there, and we're close to that.
All right, Tony.
All right, just one question. Speaking of masks, I saw an article a few weeks ago about just African-American people in the community, some fearing wearing a mask because they don't want to fit a description for any crime. Has that been a discussion within the police department as to how you make, certain people in minority communities feel more comfortable wearing these masks as they need to per CDC guidelines?
Well, currently we haven't seen an uptick in a crime that will result in us stopping somebody with that. The messaging piece is what's more important. Oftentimes, what I like to do as far as when we talk about community-oriented policing is those type of interaction. We want that to come up in community meetings that occur at the districts, with each district location having their own unique way of or established community groups to get that messaging through there. But I haven't seen that if there's a need for that message. We do have a public information office, and that hasn't been something that's been brought to my attention. But again, if it were, we would put something out there.
Kick it back over to Eric.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry.
No, no worries. Chief, earlier this year, you were pretty outspoken about your frustration over some of the salaries for your assistant chiefs that you wanted to put into place. Where does that stand right now? Are those chiefs in place? And if so, are you happy and content with where they're at right now as far as salaries and that type of thing?
No, the salaries were denied by City Hall, and I currently have one of the two. So that assistant chief is working at a low salary. My role and my position is I have the authority provided to make the selection. The Fire and Police Commission approves my selection, which they did. But that piece goes through the city, the Department of Employee Relations to authorize the pay. And that was denied. So I have an assistant chief currently that's making less than a lieutenant right now.
Sorry, go ahead, Elliot.
On Monday, Chief, you said someone asked you a question about how many officers in your ranks have been infected with the virus, and you declined to answer. You said you wouldn't say publicly, you wouldn't disclose publicly those numbers, and I was wondering if you could explain the thinking behind that.
The thinking behind that is goes along with the strategy that we publicly, for example, deployments. It goes along with the strategy and deployments. Do you want to show where your officers are at, where they're deploying, so that if someone wants to commit a crime, they know where to go? If I had a district shut down because of the COVID, thank God that it's not, and I said, 100 and some members from one district have all contained it, and we're struggling patrolling that district, where do you think our robberies would start growing in that district? And that's why we don't message how many are sick, how many are out there, and what areas it's impacting.
Tony, back to you.
Chief, you mentioned that you were down some numbers when it came to staffing levels. Where are we in terms of police staffing? Where do you want us to be? And have you done anything differently to recruit more people, say, from other departments and bring them here to Milwaukee?
And I know that, and I'm going to say this with a challenge, because this is, I hate to stay away from the politics. And I understand it. Financially, the police department is a big strain on the city's budget, and I get that. But in the theory of community policing, to lower and this is why I want more sworn, to reduce their area of responsibility also allows you to engage better with the community. So one would say, why are those officers sitting on the porch talking to somebody in the neighborhood? That's part of establishing relationships. For me, I don't see anything wrong with that. Or stopping in a parking lot to talk to somebody or engage in conversation. That's positive contact, and that's establishing relationships. And you can do that more when your area of responsibility is smaller and you have the ability to still handle the calls for service. But when you reduce the number of sworn, it pushes you more to focus on the calls for service. So if we go back to the 90s going into the 2000s, we were at just around 2,200 sworn. And we are now down to roughly around 1,800 sworn. And that number of changes we're authorizing in the books, and these are where the numbers contradict each other. And I don't want to give you misinformation, but the books will say we're authorized for 1,900. But if you don't have an academy class, I'm authorized for 1,900, but we're not 1,900. And when we're saying, well, you're currently, today you had 1,850 sworn. Yeah, but I just had 20 people retire this week. And sometimes in 1 week, we can have double-digit retirements. So that the numbers keep changing. And I can tell you that there's more number of expected retirements than there are coming in.
Eric?
For reckless driving, and obviously that's something that the city's been focused on for a while now, is there a cause and effect of what we've seen recently with the pandemic at all?
Yes, well, the traffic has reduced, and that's good to see, but you still have the reckless driving that's occurring, and we're still enforcing that piece. I would say in becoming a reactive, moving towards reactive policing right now because of the pandemic, that's one piece that we're still engaging with, and we're still going to do some of the monies that were set aside for traffic enforcement. We're still implementing that and still putting those strategies out. So you will see traffic enforcement. In fact, there's one that we're going to do in the next within the next week, where you'll see a little visibility on us on our part for traffic. But I will tell you that in the 2 years that we've been here, there's progress, and I can't thank the 3 E's and the different groups that have gotten involved and to really push the reckless driving. And what I mean by that is the engineering, the education, and the enforcement piece. The law enforcement can do the enforcement piece, and we can do the messaging and some of the education. But I can't thank some of the groups, Alderman Mike Murphy, former Alderman Bob Donovan, and Alderman Borkowski took a stance into messaging. Take it easy, Milwaukee. You had the reckless driving initiative that Alderman Murphy established. Those are very helpful because that brings in the engineering piece. And you can see some of our areas at City Hall have the engineers in City Hall department, the different departments from City Hall in changing some of the streets and how that affects reckless driving, from speed bumps to narrowing the intersections to reduce the running of red lights and the speeding and passing on the right, that type of reckless. So it's a team effort. There are changes. There is progress, but there's a lot more to do. And that comes from years of ignoring all of this. So I can't thank the team enough, the different organizations that have come forward to really help message that. And we're still working at it. And we're still going to work with our partners, our Milwaukee Law Enforcement Group, the McLeah, the Sheriff's Department, and the State Patrol, and working collaboratively to address that type of activity, the reckless driving.
Elliot?
So far, have you had to take any enforcement action against any businesses? Have you referred charges to the DA's office regarding any business in Milwaukee?
Yes, we have. There was one particular restaurant where we took action at the end of last week. We have had some business checks as a result of that. We've had over 300 business checks that were related to the pandemic, where we had to make some type of take some type of action. And what I mean by that, it could have been simply the advisal part, or not citation, the arrest piece. And we're frequently addressing, outside of the businesses, we're doing about 60 locations a day that have COVID cases connected. So the business checks are things that we're trying to address, but we're also going to some of the locations because of the calls that have positive tests for COVID. And both of those are consistent, continual thing that we're monitoring.
Because you took that step against this restaurant, does that mean the restaurant tried to resist in some way to close down after being contacted by police?
But they were not resisting the police, they were resisting the health department orders. We were there for the enforcement piece.
Tony, back to you.
Just to clarify one thing, you said did you say 30 or 60 locations per day generally? And your approach to that, like the officers that are dispatched to those calls, are there any protocols when you deal with those type of calls?
Yes, we average about 60 locations a day that have well, we know there's a positive test for COVID or at those locations. Yes, they take the, and that's why I mentioned those, because now that we were able to identify those areas, the officers do treat it differently, where they're going to have their personal protective equipment on. It's not going to be a question whether do I wear it in this one? You're going to wear everything.
Are there any areas in the city that you see more of those calls happening in?
It's the same that the health department is giving the through the media through the media briefings. It's the same information. We have the north side, what I would say police district 7 and district 4. You have district 2 on the south side. Those are the areas where we see more of the positive cases or the address you have to go to.
Okay, Eric?
I saw a scooter the other day on the side of the road. I was shocked. So when we get into this, what is your role, if any, when it comes to if we start seeing more and more scooters being used in the city of Milwaukee again this spring and summer?
I anticipate that once the public gets out there, they're going to be using the scooters. Again, our approach, and we have a finite. I talked about resources and what I want our officers to really focus on. I hope that the majority of times, I can't ever say we won't take action, and you'll never hear me say we won't. You never say that. Hear me say that we're going to flat out make arrests on certain things, unless it's a gun crime. And what I mean by that is we give the officers the ability to make decisions when they see infractions and figure out ways to take care of them. And some of those, I hope, start off with some messaging.
Elliot?
Are you aware of any law enforcement agency in the Milwaukee area who's expressed any reluctance whatsoever to enforce the Safer at Home order?
I'm going to pretty much speak the same as what I've stated. And what I mean by that is the law enforcement community in the city, county, state of Wisconsin has not been any closer than this. And I was told more than 30 years, because I wasn't on this job 30 years ago. But the relationships are great. We really do a job at consulting with one another. In fact, if I don't get an email, I get a phone call. But as far as the Milwaukee County group, we've been done a good job at communicating with one another. And I will tell you, this is separate what I told the Milwaukee Police Association, is the departments are different in size. So what even in that communication, for example, a police suburb in Milwaukee might publicly say our detectives are taking calls for service because of the slimming down, but that agency may have only 2 to 4 detectives assigned to their entire department. Where I just told you we're down 50 plus detectives. We're allocated more like 190 detectives. That's not going to happen in the city of Milwaukee. So what I mean by that, the message that may happen in a suburb may not be the same, but that doesn't mean we're not communicating with one another.
Mm-hmm. Tony?
You have a very unique job, and I feel that, obviously it comes with a unique set of challenges. In this moment, aside from your normal duties, what is the biggest challenge for Police Chief Morales here in the city of Milwaukee?
The biggest challenge currently, and what's keeping me up at night, is the ability to move my personnel because of the restrictions with promotions and having the leadership that I need here. I just told you I have one assistant chief. The other one has not because of the city hall not allowing me to get the pay, even though it's a part of my budget. The promotional exams. These are not exams that were open for promotion this year. They should have been done more than 2 years ago. I should have been, for me as the chief coming in, my first request was I need promotional lists I don't do the promotional exams for detective, for sergeant, or lieutenant. The Fire and Police Commission does that piece, and I need those promotions to go. The change in leadership at the Fire and Police Commission, I can't blame the current person that's there. They're taking in what was left behind. So for me, I have movement that needs to be done within the department. That's, I'm going to have by the end of spring up to 5 captain vacancies. I have double-digit lieutenants, double-digit sergeants, more than 50 detectives. It's a large number. I stated this before, and I was prepared to have up to 100 promotions, bless you, up to 100 promotions by the summer that now are held back because the interview processes have been placed on hold. Those are huge challenges. What do? If I promote a captain, I'm stealing from Peter to pay Paul. I'm going to have to move a lieutenant to fill in that spot. Where is my sergeant going to fill in? And what do? And on top of that, and this, don't know if this question comes up, but we have ACLU agreement. And part of the ACLU piece is I need those leadership positions, those supervisory positions, to really hold that agreement accountability piece intact, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So what keeps me at night is, where do I get them from? Where do I put them? And they need training.
Yeah. Eric?
Who can help you with some of that salary stuff, like the assistant chief thing? Is that something the mayor can throw some weight around on? Is the new common council, is there some way you can get some leverage from some of these other groups?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Go ahead, Elliot.
I was just wondering if you'd be willing to talk a little about, you mentioned earlier how this has been hard for your family because you have 2 children who want to see their friends. I was wondering if you'd offer a little bit more detail about just how it's affected your personal life and your family and what the Morales home is like these days.
I will tell you on a positive note, I give my wife a lot of credit because I anger her a lot when she's still 27 years later says, when are you getting home? The pandemic has allowed me to get home at a more scheduled time. So it has allowed me to actually see my kids. So on a good note, it's helped me see them more. And that perspective. However, it's the burden is not so that it's the kids' growth. When you're young, and that's why I see some of the problems that occur and the struggles with the order to stay, to stay home, the social distancing. It's difficult for the youth. This is my son. He's 18. He is waiting his results for acceptance into the Air Force Academy. All of that has been slowed down. So that energy that you have, they get out and go for their runs and the exercise piece, but you still come back home. So it's a challenge for them, and it's tough to see them there because they want to do something. There's nowhere to go really. Your theaters are closed. For the most part, shopping is closed unless it's for your food or the essentials. So where do they get to go? And I think they watched every movie they could on Netflix.
Mm-hmm. Tony?
You go down the ranks in the police department, talk to some of the officers, beat cops. What are some of the general things you're hearing from them during COVID-19 and the pandemic and how they're working? What are some of their biggest challenges and just how do they feel overall?
I can't thank them enough for they're in great spirits right now. The first week was a challenge, and I was out at several roll calls because of it. And there was a miscommunication that was going on. When this pandemic started, the messaging that went out through media, through other social media, through other law enforcement agencies left a lot of questions. And it created, I'll be honest with you, even internally, it created a little frenzy where now our hand sanitizing wipes start getting thin. Our gloves start getting thin because, you're always going to have the hoarder in the group. And those were challenges, and even the Milwaukee Police Association, the union, where we actually had for the first 2 weeks a daily phone call with the unions, both the MPSO and the MPA, where their members were calling to them, hey, I don't have a mask. I don't have the gloves, sanitizer. So we're really on a hustle to get all of that accomplished. That resulted in us going public to get the to request for donations and get us to where we are now. But a lot of that was, where do I, I'm running out of these PPEs. What am I going to do? And even the request for the PPEs, our officers, what was difficult is what I told them was coming, and then it wasn't coming. So the mask at the initial, when I said, hey, we got a request, it's coming, and this is no secret, the mask was the big thing that got delayed. So that started a little bit of concern, but the messaging and getting out and actually seeing them. If the officers are out on the street, I'm going to go out on the street with them. And that's what I did right away, to get out there and saying, hey, this is what happened. This is the reason why we got held up on our masks, but we're out there to get them for you. So the first weeks we struggled, but we're okay now.
We're okay. So in pretty good shape with PPE and the officers.
Yes. We're right at the point, if we get another delivery, we'll be at the point where now I can start enforcing that they all wear it at every contact.
Okay.
We're not there yet.
Cool. Eric?
You mentioned your son in the Air Force Academy, so that's on hold. So there's this expectation that he possibly would not go because of that? Is it's just too early to say what's going to happen with some of these academies?
I don't know. We haven't got any updates, so I don't know where that's going. We're hoping for an answer late last month. So
I assume with some of the universities in town too, they're obviously still in flux too, as what's going to happen maybe even this fall, if you can even have students in. Would there be any type of, and I can't imagine what this would be, but would there be any type of cooperation with officers at Marquette or at UWM and to be able to coalesce if they don't have any work to do, so to speak?
yeah. I don't know. I can tell you just, this is my first son, that the communication from the universities, once the pandemic started, almost halted, because obviously he's been accepted to other universities, and even that communication has halted right now. So I'm sure that's because of the staff at those schools has been reduced.
Go ahead, Elliot.
You're one of the few institutions who is also still maintaining an office workplace, and I was wondering just what's it like in the offices of MPD right now with the pandemic going on? Is it awkward engaging with other coworkers because you don't want to transmit germs with each other, or just what's it like in the halls of MPD?
Well, the different districts. Because this is pretty unique, the captains were both, they all have the autonomy to explore how they're going to do their roll calls. With some districts, they actually set up their roll calls where they're separate, 6 feet apart, and do their roll call briefing. In other districts, they're doing them in the parking lot or the garage to really spread themselves out, or they're staggering the meetings in the office. So instead of having a robust, let's just say 7 o'clock roll call, it's more, every 15 minutes to get people in and out of the offices. And each district is doing what they feel works best for them. We don't have a tried and tested method. On the what we call the 7th floor, the executive branch here, our offices are pretty well spaced apart. The office that I'm in here is a pretty big office, a pretty big conference table where we're all pretty much distanced apart when we're having our meetings. But the civilian staff that comes to work, the executive staff that's coming to work, we're still coming to work here as we want to show our troops that we appreciate that they're coming. We're going to come to work too. I could easily do this from my office at home, but the part of it is the messaging. If they got to come to work, we're going to come to work.
Gentlemen, I'm going to hop in here since we're going to end on an even number with our panelists and their questions. We have a few minutes left with the chief, so I would like to, if you're okay with this, Chief, go to our audience and see what they've typed in terms of questions they would like to have answered. I'll do these in the order in which they were received. First of all, Chief Morales, thank you for being here. What have you been able to learn since Sunday about the incident and the arrest of an off-duty officer after a violent altercation during a gathering at that officer's home?
One of the things that I want to say is in that incident, I'm limited on the information that we can release. But what we have released is something that we needed to the public to know, that it was important for them to know, to show transparency on this piece. I was out at that scene. We requested the district attorney's office to handle that investigation. And on top of that, we had the Wisconsin Department of Justice Crime Lab process that crime scene. In addition to that, I had an internal affairs liaison at every part of that investigation, from the interview piece, crime scene piece, hospital piece, to ensure the integrity of the investigation. When this is completed, I'm very confident that the allegations or perceptions on how this was handled are going to come off positive. And it's sad. It's a sad situation for both the person in the hospital as well as the law enforcement officer. But what I can tell you is that this incident that occurred was at a person's house who happens to be a law enforcement member. So this was all things that occurred off duty and at that person's home. It's just a sad situation on both sides. And we did our best to ensure the integrity of this investigation was done at the highest standard.
Hey, Gene, your mic is off.
Hello, first time caller, long time listener. Question for you, Chief. Somebody would like to know about the status of the Molson Coors investigation. Thank you.
Prior to the pandemic, and I stated this, we have a presentation that we can give the public. But one of the things we wanted to do first is have that presentation for the victims' families and for the executive staff of Molson Coors. We had a date scheduled in March, but that was canceled as a result of the orders due to this pandemic. When we go back into some type of normalcy, we're going to go back with the victim's family, show them that presentation, and if there's a need for the public, if you want that presentation, we will provide it to the public, but not until we present it to the victims' families first.
Another question, Chief. Can you identify a few of your priorities for the next few years of your term, the things you would most like to accomplish in addition to your day-to-day policing?
Yes, I want to, when we talk about community-oriented policing, or the definition of community-oriented policing, it is very broad. Part of what I want to do with the police department is institutionalize it. So when we have a standard set on how we want that to happen, our vision of that, it goes from the training academy, from recruit training to a piece that occurs at in-service on a regular basis. Those are mandated hours that we have to push. One of the challenges in that piece, and why it takes a while, is when you have a lawsuit or the ACLU lawsuit that mandates training. Currently, we have the DNC that mandates training, preparation for officers for those things. That takes priority. And the type of training that I want to implement to really institutionalize what I want, the vision I want, is waiting in 2021. And if something comes up that's priority before that, that gets placed on the back burner. So for me, I want to set standards and training that is going to push on better communication skills, making decisions under stress, things of that nature that, in my opinion, prevent that lawsuit from happening.
One more question in the few minutes we have left with you, Chief. Chief Morales, when you say compliance and citations at a protest, does that include protesters who would be in violation of maintaining 6 feet of social distancing or gathering in a large crowd, or both?
Both.
Easy enough. Another question, I was curious about 2 things. Are people who are committing crimes and getting arrested also getting a citation or charge for violating the stay-at-home order in addition to the original charges, say for a break-in or something of that nature?
It's in addition to it's in addition to the charges. So currently the citation isn't authorized. I'm hoping by next week we can issue the citation. But crimes, if somebody's arrested for a burglary, they're getting the state charge for the statute 252. If it's again, the citation is going to be one more. That's it's the start of the messaging piece, the education piece. We move up to citation, and if it escalates to an arrest where the state charge is applied, then we move to that level.
Seems you had one more question. Has there been any concern or discussion about making sure that there aren't discrepancies or disparities in enforcement of the safer at home orders, such as where people are from or their social ethnic demographics? Thank you for your service during these trying times.
Thank you very much, first and foremost. But that is true. In Milwaukee, the areas that are affected are the within the minority communities. Which is one of the reasons, and again, I keep on moving towards messaging and education. We've done our messaging, at least through the police department, in various languages to ensure that we're hitting the right audience. And in addition to that, we're trying to use some other groups. We currently did a video with a faith-based group yesterday. And we continue to do the messaging piece to hit the organizations or the certain neighborhoods to hope to get voluntary compliance.
Chief, our time with you is wrapping up, and we certainly want to thank you for being part of this maiden voyage of ours in terms of digital Zoom teleconferencing. First Newsmaker we've ever done without a live audience that I know of in the 135 years of the Milwaukee Press Club. And we thank you for joining us today, for your honesty in terms of dealing with some very tough questions, and also for flat out availing yourself. And I hope we can call on you again to do this in the near future, because the community likes hearing from its police chief, quite obviously. Thanks to Tony Atkins, Eric Bilstad, Elliot Hughes for your fantastic questions and your great participation amongst yourselves. You 3 played together very nicely. It was like you're doing your own TV show. It's very good. Thanks as well to our sponsors, our presenting sponsor, Spectrum News One, our sustaining sponsor, Miller Quass, our event partners, WizPolitics.com and Rotary Club of Milwaukee. And again, we can't thank those folks enough for doing this kind of thing first and allowing us to barnacle off their technology and their expertise and making this whole event happen. This is part of our future at the Milwaukee Press Club. When normal days return, and hopefully those days are sooner rather than later, we will include this sort of technology moving forward as we try to grasp all platforms in order to be a service to the community and also to journalists in southeastern Wisconsin and whoever wants to join. Speaking of which, if you'd like to join the Milwaukee Press Club, if you've been inspired by what you saw today and said, hey, this is a group I'd like to be a member of, just go to MilwaukeePressClub.org, sign up, and we'd love to have you on board. Chief Morales, panelists, viewers, thank you all. Have a terrific week, and please stay safe, stay healthy, and wash your hands.
If I can add one more thing, I want to thank you all for what you do. And it's a tough job, and social media sometimes sways your media in different directions. And I see the challenges, and by getting to know and establishing relationships with you, I understand how tough your job is. So thank you very much for doing this and really promoting each other, the law enforcement image and the media image. I also want to thank our members, our sworn, I can't say it enough, and our civilian. They could stay and use an excuse to stay at home, and they're coming to work. And it's amazing, and I can't thank them enough. I can't thank our first responders, our fire department, our medical personnel, and the essential people that are going to work every day. I can't thank them enough. Everybody's been acting very orderly for the most part in those entities, and I want to thank them all. And for the people that are complying with the stay-at-home order. Thank you very much. God bless you.
Thank you. Back at you, sir. Stay safe. To the men and women of the Milwaukee Police Department, please thank you for what you do. Thank you for viewing. We'll see you next time.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, everybody.